Hello everyone, I'm that Catholic Gamer Dude, and you're all probably wondering, where'd you go, man? I know, I basically said in my last video that I'm changing up the format somewhat to actually produce more content, and then I disappear for almost 3 weeks. So basically, what's happened over the last couple of weeks? Well, first off, my mother-in-law arrived, and so for those who have been with me since I started last year, you know that when family comes, that tends to rearrange the schedule a little bit. So we've been kind of trying to figure out how to kind of rearrange things so that I get some recording time. And we're kind of settling in a little bit, but it's been kind of difficult to kind of negotiate that. And for those who don't know, the reason why that's difficult to negotiate is because the recording office that I have here is right next to the bedroom where she'd be sleeping. So usually I record at 6 in the morning, so you can see why that would be a bit of a problem. On other news, I actually had a colonoscopy. Now, for those, again, a lot of you who will follow me for a while know that I do suffer from stomach issues from time to time. And so this was just a normal checkup, blah, blah, blah. But preparing for that and other stuff like that kind of took away from time. So good news is, didn't get too much, waiting for test results next week. But I expect them to come back fine. They pretty much told me they didn't really see anything. So that should all be good. And finally, I'm going to get real with you guys. See, here's the thing. Something kind of happened. It was kind of momentous, and it kind of sucked up a lot of time. What happened? Civilization 6. Yeah, I know. I led you on with that. I'm sorry. But, Civilization 6 got released a couple of weeks ago, and I've been playing that in every spare moment. It's consumed everything else that I've done. So that's pretty much it. One more turn turned into a week and a half, maybe. I don't know. I haven't looked at the time of how long I played. For those who are wondering, quick review. It's great, except that the AI is dumb as bricks, and I think they'll probably want to kind of fix that before more people are going to jump on, but otherwise, I really do enjoy it. So now that we've gotten that on the way, on to business. First off, based on the feedback from my last video, the following notes I have made. For starters, people like the idea of the longer discussion videos, which is one of the reasons why I'm doing this now, and I'm glad because I've often felt that when I'm doing my short frame illustrated videos that I keep thinking to myself, gosh, it would be really great if we could dig into this a little bit more. But on the other hand, I don't feel like animating a 20-minute video. So there's that. So I'm really glad that you guys are open to it, and I definitely look forward to creating some more of this long-form content stuff, and we'll see what happens. I've already written up kind of a script for it, and I'm going to record that almost as soon as I'm done with this one. Other feedback of note. A number of you have suggested things like live streams or podcasts, and while I do like the idea, and I actually get that suggestion quite a bit, for those who are familiar with my situation at the moment, here are the problems with that, at least in the short term. First off, my schedule is really tight. Even with these easy long-form videos, just finding time to sit down to write and record this stuff. I mean, these scripts are not very complicated. I've just got like a bulletin points kind of thing of the things I want to touch on, and even then, that is kind of difficult. So my time is not my own, especially since the OB-GYN has told us that we can expect our daughter to arrive in the next 2 weeks or so. That is going to even throw more of a monkey wrench into the plan. So setting up stuff like the live streams or the podcast requires actually setting aside time and scheduling it ahead of time, two things that I really don't have either the time or the ability to do right now. I can barely figure out what's going to go on from day to day. So for the moment, I'm going to have to kind of set that aside for now. It is worth revisiting, though, and I would say like a couple of months when things kind of settle down a little bit. I know I keep saying that, but 2016 has been a really tumultuous year for us at the house, and I think for a lot of other people as well. So we're going to have to take a look at that, but it is something that I do want to do, and in fact, I've even registered a Twitch channel for this, and I have never really been able to advertise it or even use it just because I can hardly ever find the time to stream when anyone else will be awake. So other things that were suggested, collaborative gaming efforts, looking with other players. I've done a couple of those with my family because a number of them are gamers, but again, because my schedule has shifted so drastically, that requires some coordination and getting everybody on board and setting up everybody else's schedule. So that's going to be somewhat difficult, but there's always the potential for that when things settle down again. Having said that, I'm really open to the idea. The Discord channel, which I've advertised on here on occasion, is more active now, especially with kind of like a core group of 3 or 4 people. They've been putting together Civ games and other things like that, and so I've been definitely want to try to kind of collaborate with them, but again, it's just scheduling and timing and all that other stuff. But if you guys have any other suggestions for collaboration, as in who to collaborate with, please feel free to drop comments or suggestions in the video comment section. And yeah, just keep sharing ideas. I like a lot of the ideas that are coming in. I'm logging everything, and I do actually try to respond to that feedback. And if I don't get to do it actually in the comment section, then I'll definitely do it in the video. I do want this long format to actually be more of an interaction kind of thing with you guys, the audience in general. One quick note for the couple of you who are part of the Patreon. Most of you have said that you're cool with whatever, and I really do appreciate that and the flexibility. And I appreciate that you appreciate that I'm as open as I am about what's actually going on. So what I've decided to do, and I agree with one of the suggestions, I wish I could remember the name at the moment, but the suggestion was to actually keep with the 2 videos per month. And that way, and it's a good idea, is that it's not just the fact that, it kind of keeps everything the same, but that it actually keeps me motivated trying to churn out more content. So thank you. I wish I could remember your name at the moment. I don't have the Patreon in front of me at the moment, but it's a really good suggestion. I really do appreciate all of the support from the fans, Patreons, and not. So without further ado, what are we going to talk about for our first topic? Well, seeing as how there's a lot of soul searching going on YouTube at the moment, one of the things that I've seen in the trend over the last couple of days and weeks and stuff is that YouTube has changed its algorithm again. And a lot of YouTubers seem to be kind of burnt out and really trying to figure out where they can refocus and retweak what they do on their channels. And even though they don't have their audiences, I definitely am going through that phase this time of trying to figure out how to get more content out there and actually keep this channel active more than once every 2 weeks. YouTube has changed its algorithms yet again to not only include subscriber interaction, but they also are now focused on how often does a particular YouTuber, how often they upload, and then cross that with how often your subscribers actually watch your upload, the frequency of your uploads. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that, and MattPat over at Game Theory has an excellent video about how that works and why it actually makes sense in a way, but at the same time, for YouTube creators, it's actually a very huge grind. Not that we've ever been susceptible to that, because once again, we're such a small channel that we barely exist on YouTube's radar, so it's not like if I take off for 2 weeks, I have such a dedicated audience at the moment, and I really do appreciate that, and so whenever I get around to updating or uploading content, you guys always come through in the end, so I really do appreciate that. But I figured for this first one, in order to talk about where we're going, it's kind of a good idea maybe to talk about a little bit about how this channel came into existence. And in order to do that, you kind of have to know a little bit more about me. And since I like to talk about me, I'm my favorite subject, and I'm kind of working on that. It's one of the reasons why I'm Catholic. But, the thing is that part of being the content creator is that you kind of have to put yourself into a lot of your content that you're creating. So I guess we'll just get started with this. In terms of thinking about the Catholic faith and how I came to actually start creating content was that, like a lot of people, is that when I was in college, I encountered an evangelical group. And I hung out with them, but obviously when you hang out with the evangelical group, especially as one devoted as the group that I was with, you eventually run into those, Catholic evangelical differences, and I realized I really had no idea why I believed certain things or, why I didn't believe other things. So I became very interested in Catholic apologetics, and while I read a bunch of different things, the only one that really stands out in my mind at the moment, especially in my early formative years, was Dave Armstrong, who's currently over at Pathos. And the thing that really attracted me to his work is that he does a lot of research, and he puts a lot of that stuff in his blog posts. So, and that was the first thing that really attracted to me and said, actually there is actually a lot of information out there that I just haven't really tapped. And really, I've been debating and arguing and getting in trouble ever since with that stuff. I started out with on various forums and other things like that, because when you're 20, you think, oh, I've got it now, so I can just go ahead and convince everybody with argument. And then you realize, one, your arguments are not nearly as good as you think that they are, and two, The real truth is that human beings are a really eclectic mix of reason, emotion, and experience, and all that other stuff. And so argumentation will only get you so far in a lot of ways. And so that was kind of the first, that's really you can only learn that through experience and interacting with a lot of people, and especially online, because all you have are your words and your arguments. And so when things get really heated and you can't really figure out why because there's such a communication disconnect, it gets to a point where you begin to realize that even if you think your arguments are great, that if the other side just isn't receiving them, then, what's the point? That's not to say that you shouldn't do that or engage in those kinds of discussions. It's just that you have to keep the certain humility and awareness in mind that, your reason and your ability to argue, even if it's like perfectly solid and logical, there may be other obstacles in other people's lives to seeing your point of view. And it sounds like such a cliche, but when you're in the heat of the moment in that debate where you have to prove someone on the internet is wrong, it's easy to lose sight of. So I've been doing this for a bit, and I actually ended up writing a blog for a while, and I actually did pretty well for myself because I got picked up by a electronic Catholic young adults magazine. It's a small outfit that was kind of a collaborative effort. I was invited by a friend of mine who actually knew the editor, and it was kind of put together, just a bunch of different Catholic bloggers, regardless of who their audience was. My audience really didn't exist until I actually got associated with this site. And so I did pretty well for myself, or so I thought. I found my articles on occasion on sites like Red State or New Advent, and I actually still have Kevin Knight's contact information, and he's been very kind to post a couple of the videos that I've found on this channel. So on the couple of videos where you see like 1,000 views or things like that, that's because he posted those links, and I really do appreciate that. I even one point found one of my articles translated it into Romanian, I think it was, and it wasn't like a Google translation or something like that. Like somebody actually took the time to take my article and translate it into that actual, that native language. So for all those who might actually try to read my stuff, I don't think it would be too difficult to figure out who it is, but the reason why I keep this anonymous, at least for right now, is because it's the only way my wife will let me. She's kind of concerned about exposure, especially for controversial opinions such as the Catholic faith, and I can understand that, and so this has kind of been our compromise. But if you do kind of figure out who I am, I wouldn't be too surprised, because I'm not very, I'm not overly secure or overly cautious about that sort of thing. But because it's such a small audience, at least for right now, I don't think it really matters. So anyways, I did that for a while, but towards the end of my time blogging, it became more difficult to write, partially just because of writer's block. But the thing I realized was that I was writing about certain topics because I kind of felt like I had to. And the Catholic blog sphere, kind of revolves around certain topics, especially like election times or sexual morality or some other stuff like that, because, it has to stay relevant. I mean, that's just what blogging is. But at the same time, I felt like that I was writing about topics because everybody else was writing about topics. And what I began to realize was that I wasn't, even though I could argue on those points very well or talk about these things, I began to kind of feel like this burnout because I really felt like I wasn't contributing anything new. And so I kind of started to saunter away from blogging for a little while, and then the thing that finally got me off of it altogether was the little guy was born. So my son being born basically took what little spare time I had for blogging and completely took it over. And so it was, obviously it's a life-changing experience. So it took a lot of different things that I hadn't experienced before and things like that. And it was really difficult to kind of find my way back into blogging. And because I'd already been going through this time where I couldn't really think about, why I was doing it. And so it actually kind of enforced a break that I had to take in order to really just kind of think about what I wanted to do and how I wanted to contribute and things like that. But I think what actually kind of started tipping me to the point where talking about games from a Catholic perspective was I found myself in kind of two worlds. The first world was that I was a Catholic blogger. And then on the other hand, at least for in terms of my passion and my interests, I was a video gamer. And the two never really, met at any point. One didn't necessarily influence the other. I kind of keep them in very separate spheres. And especially since even before my son was born, where I actually had more time to play them. I'll try not to be too resentful about that. It was the case where it was just two completely different things in my head. There was like the Catholic side of me, and then there was the gamer side of me. Part of that obviously is because it's predominantly atheist agnostic types culturally when you go into these, gaming subcultures. And if gamers, to the point where even if gamers had a religion, then you wouldn't know it. I think the completionist is like a fallen away Catholic by his own admission, or non-practicing, how he described himself. And, as far as anyone else in the YouTube space, I mean, who would know? Because it's such a contentious issue that even bringing it up, I think the funniest thing that I found was that I think it was Final Fantasy 13-3, where, the main character, Lightning, if I remember now, it's been a while, was supposed to be like the servant of God or something, and all the atheists were like, oh, turning it off. Nope, not watching that. As soon as you hear God, goodbye. And at least that was what I saw in the comments, and I was laughing to myself because I was like, you guys do realize that this would actually be right up your alley, because God in this game turns out to be a real jerk. But, there's a general hostility to religion, and that's the funniest part about it, because as we've talked about this show on this show very often, is that, there's a lot of references to religion and religious culture in games, especially in fantasy games. They often create their own fantasy religion. It gets to a point where I feel like that gaming, even more so than any other medium, is one of the most God-haunted mediums out there right now. And I feel like that kind of contributes to where we can kind of get into that and actually talk about some of that stuff. And so I started forming this idea to actually have a channel for other Catholic gamers, and at least to show a Catholic who is, as serious as he tries to be in his faith, actually enjoying games and talking about them. Talking about them a bit from a Catholic perspective without necessarily bludgeoning that point to death. I honestly do feel like that games can be an interactive medium. I think they are held back, as we've talked about on various episodes before, certain aspects about the gaming culture and what the expectations from games are that kind of hold it back at the moment. At least that's how I feel. And it can be an interactive art form. What other form of media allows the viewer or the receiver of that medium to participate in it in that way? I feel like that has a tremendous amount of potential, but I do feel like that games kind of need to get out of their own way at the moment. And I think one of the first steps is to actually start taking certain subjects like religion a little more seriously. And so that's how I started thinking about a way to engage the culture in a unique way. And I drew a lot of inspiration, as I mentioned in my last video, from Stephen Grananis over at Real Talk, about his reviews for the National Catholic Register, and talking about movies where he talks about movies from a faith perspective, but doesn't beat it to death, or perhaps more accurately, doesn't bludgeon movies for not conforming to a Catholic presentation of issues or things like that. He talks about things as the way they are, and talks about the good and the bad and his perspective on those things. And so the channel was, at least how I conceived it in my head, is a way to combine love for the faith and passion for gaming at the same time. And the other goal would be to talk about, overall cultural issues in a way by examining the stories that are told in games. I do feel like that a lot of the issues that you see in the narratives in games actually come from the larger cultural issues surrounding it. And sometimes it's fairly obvious where they're coming from, and other times it gets a little more subtle. And I also feel like that even game developers and game designers who actually want to be better still struggle with it because of certain assumptions and a lack of understanding that exists in the gaming culture as a whole right now. And the reason why I think that games actually hold that potential is because games are the ones where these original stories are being written. You look at a lot of the Moviescape and other things like that, is that you see a lot of like reboots and a lot of retreads of these stories and stuff like that. And, there isn't, there are, obviously there is original stuff in movies, but especially with like the blockbusters and a lot of other things like that, you're seeing a lot of retreads of older stories and older IPs. games suffer from the same problem of the sequeling, but they also have a lot of new, intellectual properties and things like that. And I think there's a lot more going on there than what you see that gets actually out to the general public and the core gamers, as opposed to what you see in something like the movies or something like that. So it was an idea in my head for about, I would say, like a year or so. But the final kind of point that really kind of convinced me to really launch this was, any of you all remember Gamergate? Yeah, I know. It's going to evoke a lot of different emotions, but stick with me on this for a minute. Now, for those who don't know about Gamergate, I can kind of give just a brief overview, but what ended up happening is that a particular game developer, there's a female who got into a bit of hot water because it turned out that her relationship with a writer in one of the gaming magazines became public, and it was never disclosed, and which is obviously a violation of, journalistic ethics, or at least there were accusations of violations of journalistic ethics. But part of the issue is that obviously gaming doesn't really take itself as seriously as actually like corporate media, and however you feel about corporate media at the moment, it was really seen as kind of like this tempest in a teapot. What ended up changing that view, though, was that in the next couple of days, something like at least half a dozen to a dozen articles came out, and they all kind of revolved around the same theme. And one of the things that people had noticed were certain key phrases, and even down to like the same wording, talking about the same thing. Gamers are dead. Now, that's a small slice of what was actually being talked about in these different articles, but a lot of people stepped back and they noticed that there were a lot of key phrasing, a lot of the points were exactly the same, even down to like the exact same wording. And to a lot of people, they were like, this actually looks an awful lot like collusion. So now everybody's upset because people who were part of this little tempest in the teapot were upset because they felt like that they were slandered for actually having a legitimate concern. The writers for these different publications felt under assault because they thought they were talking about a problem, and then they got a ton of flack for it. And then the net just kept drying wider and wider, because whenever you paint with a broad brush, you end up scooping up a lot of people that you didn't intend to, and so now it became this huge fracas. But what's relevant to this channel is that particular cultural fracas got me interested in the gaming subculture in a way that I really hadn't been before. And the thing that it revealed to me is that there were a lot of cultural issues going on in gaming, but because, at least the way I felt, is that most of the people who were talking in this conversation had a certain particular set of ideological principles and ideologies. And so because of what I consider to be logical incoherencies in those principles, that the reason why people were getting so upset and so divided is because they were all sharing these same principles, and the ambiguities and incoherencies of those principles really started to manifest themselves. And I'd rather not get into anything specific at that point, because there are a lot of emotions still raw in a lot of ways, and there's a lot of contention and a lot of ideas, and Gamergate itself is an interesting phenomenon in and of itself. Interesting trivia point. What interesting personality rose to notoriety because of Gamergate? I'll give you a couple of seconds. Does anyone know? Okay, Milo Yiannopoulos. Now there's a name of notoriety, huh? I mean, however you feel about the guy, you gotta admit he's had a tremendous amount of influence over this past year. And a lot of magazines and a lot of editorials point out that he got his start with Gamergate, and he rose to prominence as a cultural force as a result of that fracas. The other reason why I don't really want to get into it is because Gamergate kind of illustrates a lot of the problems with these kinds of headless hashtag movements. And the thing is that anyone can use a hashtag, especially on Twitter. So whenever you see someone say Gamergate, it could be a person who opposes it, it could be a person who's for it, it could be a person who thinks he's for it and doesn't know what it is. And so you got so many different people using the same hashtag, but you have no idea which side of the fence are they on and what they think Gamergate means. And so it was interesting in and of itself, just because you couldn't really tell what Gamergate stood for, because it'll always look different depending upon who was actually citing the hashtag. And to me, that's the biggest issue with these leaderless movements, whether it's, and I'm going to get in trouble for this, but like Gamergate, either Black Lives Matter or the alt-right or any of these other hashtag movements that have kind of risen to prominence over this past year. But the most important thing to me about this phenomenon is that this was the thing that I really felt like that gaming culture had arrived at a point where it needs to really start talking about cultural issues and things like that from a broader perspective. And the thing is that because it is so predominantly secularist, for lack of a better term, to the point where even people who are participating in it who may be religious don't feel like that they can contribute culturally because it's such a divisive issue. So that's where, I came in. I felt like, now this is something that I can talk about because I've had experience having to deal with these different opinions and the underlying principles that animate these opinions. And I felt like that gaming could really benefit from a more diverse cast. And so I decided to kind of just throw my hat into the ring with this channel. Now, obviously, because of the complexities of these issues and the different things that need to be talked about, I'm definitely still trying to kind of feel my way through this process about what is the best way to contribute with this channel. I'm very glad that I found a bunch of like-minded individuals who are Catholics, who are gamers, and who are interested in this content. But at the same time, I feel like that the purpose of this channel is just as much to actually reach out to those other voices and actually talk about these things. But it is important to talk about these things in a way that actually connects with other people. I've been reflecting a lot for the past year on Pope Francis' statement that you do need to reach people where they are. And to me, that means that it's not that you surrender your principles and try to move into their space so that you can kind of talk to them, but it's more important to actually talk about things in a way that they can actually come around to seeing your point of view. In my experience with Catholic blogging, I've noticed that there's a lot of inside baseball talk in the Catholic sphere, and so there's a very easy trap to kind of fall into where you keep talking to each other because you all understand the lingo and you all understand where you're coming from. One of the biggest challenges of the modern age is that we've all spawned all these very ideologically divided subcultures, and trying to even come up with a common language so that we can communicate ideas back and forth is very difficult. So that's the long and the short of the goals of this channel, and I talked a little about this before, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about myself and kind of where I'm coming from on this. And I really do feel like that starting this conversation and actually moving forward with this channel and trying to come up with ways to talk about more complex subjects in a greater depth than the shorter videos allow. It's been a great experiment with the short videos, and I really do enjoy doing them. It's just that it's really hard to, and I've gotten this criticism as constructive criticism a lot, is that it's very difficult to talk about these topics in the depth that they require in 7 minutes. On the other hand, if I have to write a 15-20 minute video where I actually do all the stills, it's just not going to get done. So that's that. This is still an experimental phase. I do want to try to do these longer forms. This one's a little bit more scatterbrained only because we're still kind of talking about what we're trying to accomplish here. The next video that will come out with a longer discussion should be next week, hopefully. But I can't promise anything given the fact that in the next 2 weeks I may actually have a daughter in the house as opposed to just a son. I mean, I already do because she's in utero, but you know what I mean, guys. You know what I mean. Don't hold me to that. But my next video, should it come out next week, hopefully, is that I'm going to talk a little bit more about the last 2 videos that I have put up, which is the words. Let's try it again. The last 2 videos that I put up, which are the subtle nature of good and the problem of violence in video games. And I'm going to allude to this in the next video, but basically they're kind of interconnected because I've been playing Dragon Age Inquisition at least before Civ 6 came out. And a lot of this stuff was going through my head when I made those 2 videos as I was playing Dragon Age Inquisition, and how not only the violence in Dragon Age Inquisition kind of, because there's so much of it, kind of robs it of its potential. And yeah, I'm going to get into that. So the point is that the next video we're actually going to start talking about actual topics. So if you've listened all the way to the end of this video, I really do appreciate it, and please keep the feedback coming. If you're really interested in this kind of content, please let me know. If you're not, please let me know what you'd actually like to hear and what we'd actually like to do. This is a constantly evolving process, especially in the month of December, because I do want to renew my commitment to this channel in January, but I'd also know that I'm going to need to make these changes, and I really do want to do a little bit more experimentation with what actually appears on the channel. And so I really do appreciate the feedback, and I'd say keep it coming. It really does help out, and it helps me think, and even if I don't, as I've said before, if I don't respond to a comment, I actually do read them all. And I've been told by various YouTube videos that the reason why people always say like and subscribe is because if I actually say, if you like what you saw, please like and subscribe, then you'll actually subscribe, as opposed to having just a thumbnail at the end that says just subscribe or something. So if I actually tell you to subscribe, you'll subscribe. So are you going to subscribe? I hope you subscribe. Maybe I'm overdoing it a little bit. I'll have to go back to those videos. Anyways, I'm running out of brain power. So thank you very much for joining me. Once again, I really do appreciate your attention and your feedback. And if you're at the very end of this video, then I guess you're in it for the long haul. So thank you very much for all your support, and I'll see you next time.